The Panther tank was originally intended to counter the Soviet T-34 medium tank and to replace the Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks of the German army. Nevertheless, it served alongside the Panzer IV until the end of the war. Though officially classified as a medium tank, at 45 tons, the Panther was closer in weight to contemporary heavy tanks. The Panther's weight caused logistical problems, such as an inability to cross certain bridges, but otherwise the tank had a very high power-to-weight ratio, which made it highly mobile. The Panther tank was rushed into combat at the Battle of Kursk in the summer of 1943, despite numerous unresolved technical problems, leading to high losses due to mechanical failures. Most design flaws were rectified by early 1944, though the Allied bombing of production plants in Germany, shortage of fuel, and the declining quality of tank crews all impacted the tank's effectiveness. The Panther had 5 crew members: the commander, gunner, loader, driver, and the radio operator. The commander, the loader, and the gunner were in the turret, while the driver and the radio operator were in the hull of the vehicle. For German tank crews, the interior of the Panther was a significant improvement on the Panzer IV, which had become more and more cramped as larger guns were put into the turret. The driver had arguably the hardest job of anyone in the crew. Being able to maneuver around the battlefield effectively without damaging the vehicle's fragile drivetrain required outstanding skills. He sat on a low-padded seat down in the front left compartment of the tank, separated from the radio operator by the tank's large gearbox. The driver's position was an awkward one, especially for taller men who had to uncomfortably squeeze their legs under the axle for the drive wheels in order to reach the pedals. It did, however, have the advantage of a large escape hatch positioned directly above the seat. On the opposite side of the gearbox sat the radio operator. His position was the mirror image of the driver's position, except he had a ball-mounted MG34 in front of him, where the driver had a vision port. His only view outside the tank was through the twin periscopes mounted into roof just above the top of the glacis plate. His bulky radio was mounted over the gearbox to his left. In battle, he was supposed to operate the hull machine gun, but his most important role was usually to keep the tank commander updated on orders from the platoon leader. Although it wasn't officially part of his role, most radio operators also acted as spotters for the gunner, reporting on where shots fell and relaying corrections. The turret crew members, so the gunner, loader, and the commander, could only really communicate with the other two using the intercom system. The gunner sat on a low seat mounted to the turret floor behind the driver. He had an extremely uncomfortable and cramped position, with the breech of the main gun almost pressing against his right shoulder. The gunner controlled the turret's hydraulic traverse mechanism using a pair of foot pedals, but usually had to fine-tune any powered movement with manual adjustments using a wheel on the left of his seat. The ergonomics of his controls were poorly thought through. The turret traverse pedals were at an awkward angle to the seat, and the optical sight for the gun was placed so close to the breech that the gunner usually had to remove or partially remove his headphones to get his eye up to his eyepiece. One major disadvantage of the Panther's design was that the gunner had no periscope, limiting his vision to just what he could see through the narrow field of view provided by the optical sights. This often slowed down the process of target acquisition, as he had to scan around to find a target. In experienced crews, the commander learned to give very specific references for the location of his intended target, though even then target acquisition was much slower than in a Sherman or in a T-34. This delay was more than made up for by the astonishing accuracy made possible by the high-quality gun sight. This design had a well-designed crosshairs that made it possible to quickly gauge the range and speed of a target. Its only flaw was that it had no forehead guard on the eyepiece, meaning that any gunner to try to line up a target while the tank was in motion risked jabbing himself in the eye. In the event that the tank was hit, the gunner typically had the lowest chance of survival. To get out, he had to either scramble under the gun and squeeze out of the rear escape hatch, or climb up onto the commander's seat and out through the cupola. If either man had been killed or injured in the attack, there was often not enough room for him to get past. Officially, the loader had the simplest job of anyone in the crew, though also the most physically demanding. He had to load the gun with the ammunition specified by the commander quickly and efficiently. In long engagement, these often meant scrambling around, pulling heavy shells out of the various secondary storage bins around the interior of the tank. He had a fold-down seat, but in combat had to stand up, an awkward and uncomfortable position for most men, as the roof of the turret was only 1.5 meters high. His position was relatively open, however, compared to that of the rest of the crewmen, meaning that he was usually the most likely to escape through the rear hatch behind his position if the tank was hit. The most important member of the tank's crew was the commander. He sat on an elevated seat that was mounted to the interior of the turret just behind the gun. If he wanted to put his head out of the open cupola for a better view of the battlefield, he had to stand up on a metal footrest just under his seat. With his head in the cupola, he had a 360-degree view that enabled him to make tactical decisions about the placement of the tank and decide which targets the gunner should engage. The skill of the commander was often what decided if a Panther crew lived or died. Poorly trained commanders often lost their tanks and frequently their lives in their first battles, while others, like the Panther Air's Ernst Barkmann of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, who had 82 kills, survived the war. At their peak in September of 1944, there were 552 Panthers operational on the Eastern Front out of a total of 728. The last operational report, dated on the 15th of March 1945, lists 361 operational tanks out of 740. The Panther is often hailed as the finest tank of World War II. On paper, this is undoubtedly true. It had a higher top speed, more powerful gun and thicker armor than any Allied tank. Moreover, it cost only slightly more than the Panzer IV and was simple enough to be constructed in large numbers, unlike the heavy Tiger tanks. However, some serious flaws can be also seen. The armor, though impressive, was not well distributed. The massive glassy plate was offset by the dangerously thin side armor, which could be penetrated by almost any Allied tank or anti-tank weapon. Similarly, the top speed and good cross-country performance came at the cost of fuel efficiency, making the vehicle expensive to operate. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to support my channel, check out the PayPal donation link in the description or consider becoming a member. To make sure you don't miss my future work, subscribe to my channel please and press the bell notification button. Thank you and see you in the next video.